invite you to take your Bibles and open to Joshua, the 10th chapter. We're in our study of the campaign of the people of Israel coming and taking the land of Canaan. Joshua is leading them, and we realize that they came into Jericho and Ai. They came in the central part of the whole expansive land of Canaan that was promised to God's people. And we've seen that coming into the middle, Jericho and Ai. Now we kind of are involved with the southern campaign. And our next lesson number 5 is dealing with the northern campaign till those things are completed that Israel was to do as God was helping them in their battles. We talked a little detail about what happened when the sun stood still in our last class. I guess that was on a Wednesday night. And we kind of talked about if that took place, I believe it did, the Bible said so, and the moon stood still over the valley, that those things were taking place, that if that took place, did the sun really stand still or did the earth stand still? We're used to the sun rising, and what does it do? Where does it set? Rises in the east, sets in the west. The Bible speaks about that, toward the setting of the sun, Mediterranean Sea, from the standpoint where God's people are. And so if that's the case, that the earth stood still, because we rotate around the sun, and we had the gravitational pull of the moon, it stood still, that if that's the case, God's power, indeed miraculous power, not something that's just too great to even think about, but it's something that transcends natural law. This earth is traveling. One was said it was 6,000 miles per hour. I found it was like 1,000 miles per hour, 3 times the speed of a jet in our modern days. If that took place, we'd be shooting off to the east every time when the earth stood still. I don't know if God gradually did that. We got used to it. But I just think from here, the monument, Centennial Monument, fly over Deer Park and go into Baytown, and we'd be flying with all the trees. Everything be uprooted as something just that force, because we're traveling at least 1,000 miles per hour right now. Do you feel it? In the hair blowing or anything like that? But that's what's happening. So if that took place, which I believe it did, God held things in place. Should that be a problem with us? We think about Jesus Christ in Colossians, where all things are held together by His Word. They're all held together. And the purpose of that was indeed for the people of Israel to complete the battle that they were fighting and to win that particular battle, as we see as the day of Jehovah. We have noticed that indeed that has not been proven by modern scientists. Question number 10. It has not. In fact, it's been said that was not true. When back in the 70s, there was a big thing that we always looking for evidence for God and miracles that took place. Even the Bible says this never happened before, never happened, it hadn't happened since. I don't remember that stopping of the earth and the sun standing still. Always, well, there's eclipses. Well, that happens. But things are still moving, and all of a sudden that eclipse kind of passes away. This thing was where it all stood still, and the earth had to stand still for the sun to stand still. I mean, I'm thinking that from our perspective it would be. And how God did that without, all of a sudden we see in this text that's just the way it happened. And we see that in order to keep the sun up where it is so they could finish their work during the day. But scientists were thinking we found that there was a missing day, and therefore it must be that. But that was something just people trying to find evidence for God. And you got to be careful, because people want to do that and make there's evidence for God and the accuracy of the Bible. But this is something that transcends natural law. It did that one time. I believe it took place. And it was something that indeed was remembered. So question number 11 is where we come this morning. If you have your Bibles, turn to Joshua the 10th chapter. We're in lesson 4. You can put these in the foyer. And lesson 5 is out there, and we'll continue on with the lessons that are online as well. Number 11 says this miracle, I call it a miracle, is recorded in the New Testament Other places in the Old Testament, the book of Jashar, or it is both B and C. Some I had to change my, I don't know if you got an old version or what, but I had something like D and it's B and D, and we don't even have that option. So you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to. It's kind of confusing. But if you look at both B and C, is that as a possibility, which one did you choose? First of all, is it recorded in the New Testament? This event. Thank you, brave soul. No, it's not. But you think, God, if you ever did that, wouldn't that be something we want to hear about in the New Testament? Walls of Jericho fell down. The people marched around it. That was kind of miraculous too. But it is not recorded in the New Testament. Well, is it found in other places in the Old Testament? Old Testament scriptures. Is it found there?
There's a mention in Habakkuk 3:11, the sun and moon stood still in their habitation.
Well, would you say yes or no?
I mean, it doesn't specify that was in the days of Joshua.
Well, it hadn't happened before, it hadn't happened since, so it had to be the days of Joshua. I think that's exactly right. If you turn to Habakkuk, and notice it's in the context of the great things that God has done. It's a prayerful psalm, a prayer of Habakkuk, chapter 3 and verse 1, the prophet. And I've heard the report of thee, and I'm afraid there's the fearful thing of reverencing God. Wouldn't this event be one that might be in there? And it is. And as Joel said, we come back to verse 11. The mountains saw thee and were afraid. The tempest of waters passed by. The deep uttered the voice and lifted up hands on high. The sun and the moon stood still in their habitation, and the light of thine arrows as they went, as a shining of the glittering spear. And we know the purpose of that is that the sun would be standing still so they could complete their work in the daytime. The glittering spear, fighting, winning the battle, I think is indeed set forth there. And thou didst march through the land in indignation, didst thrash the nations in anger. That takes you back to Joshua's day. And taking the land and driving out the 7 nations in Canaan. So that indeed would be there. But when we come back to the text, we find that there is the book of Jashar. And that it's recorded there. And if you look at your outline, we'll say under B4A, it's a collection of national songs and praise for heroes, which are the upright of Israel. So it's something of upright examples, and it's recorded in that book. We don't have that book, but there were books written that indeed of recording the history, not necessarily inspired by God, but recording the events. And it's recorded there. I think it is mentioned, Joel says, in Habakkuk 3 and verse 11. So it's D, both B and C, I think is the answer there. But it's interesting to me, it's not found, not referred to, not mentioned in the New Testament at all. But it is one of those events that stand out and recorded history. And we see those two sources. Any comments or questions you'd like to have that?
You see in the days of Hezekiah, in Isaiah 38, on the sundial, Hezekiah was speaking to God, on confirmation of what God said was going to happen, so the sun went back.
Yeah, it went backwards. Yeah. That's stupendous.
Not to the extent of the whole day, but
right.
At least similar in nature.
But God can do that, and God is putting His finger on the thing, His thumbs on the scale, so to speak. You can't do that. I can. And He did that. And the idea of trying to show His people why they should reverence Him and to help them win the battles that they were fighting. But there's the point about the sundial. That's a good one. That indeed God controlled our days, and He's in control of all the things. And it's just interesting He could control the earth from us going out into outer space and just completely destruction of what was upon the earth. To go, we're rotating that fast around and we go around the sun, 1,000 miles an hour, just all of a sudden stopped. And it stood still. The sun's standing still because they're still. And that relative point, so they could do their battle. That's a miraculous thing of God. Question number 12. On this day, Jehovah blank unto the voice of blank. What do we see here that indeed this stood out as far as God is God's book is concerned? And I care about the Bible, and we do. So how did you fill in those blanks? It was the day Jehovah did what? He hearkened. He just, I'd hear it, but hearkened. What did Joshua say? Stand still. And he hearkened unto the voice of a man. And there again, as he, in that verse 14, he's fighting. He's fighting for Israel. And he's involved in saying, here, I will heed. Of course, he was commanded to do that. But I heard the voice of a man. I submitted to that command. Because why? Joshua is the leader of the people. He's the one that's involved in leading the people. He's the one taking the place of Moses. I'll be with you. Take courage. And we've talked about standing as Joshua stood and stand firm. And for me and my house, we will serve Jehovah, being a leader of the people. But this was not only a miraculous point of what God did, but indeed, here Joshua says that he's confirming that. And what other prophet enjoyed that type of connection? Mount Carmel, Elijah. He just let them do their sacrifices, and they run around and they cut themselves when they can't get their God to answer them. And God answered Elijah. He's the one that stood up. He's being confirmed in the face of men. And Elijah was saying, here would be the prophets that said, if these people die a regular death, I'm not here. I'm not a prophet for you. And that's when they're swallowed up to other people in the gainsaying of Korah. Indeed, showing who God is, indeed Moses and Elijah and here Joshua, that indeed God would do those types of things. But this was here's a command of a man, and God hearkened to it, and the sun stood still and the moon stood still over the valley, which reflected the sunlight. And that day was in place because God hearkened to the voice of a man. Now you may have one that said God did not hearken. I saw that and I corrected it, but you may have an old one that's there before I caught it. Any questions or comments on that? It's the positive side. He did hearken unto man. So now we see that Ajalon Valley, that's where the moon would stand still. Where was their camp? They were camped in Gilgal, there right off the Jordan River. And Gibeon is going to be an interesting place for us as far as recognizing that's a principal city as well. But they've entered into that campaign where we find these events are taking place. And what we begin to realize is that now we're going to be coming down to Makkedah, that just below the Ajalon Valley, heading south. We'll be coming into this particular area, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But where were these 5 kings, number 13, where were 5 kings hiding? In a cave. And 5 kings were found hiding in the cave at Makkedah in verse 17. And so, and Joshua said, rolls great stones upon them. So they were hiding there. So we began to look at where is Makkedah. Here, there's a question mark on this particular map. Not sure exactly where it is, but it'd be very close to Ajalon, where we have where the events took place after Ai and Jericho were taken care of, and we're heading south. And Makkedah is in that area. And so we come to the text. Notice in verse 15, Joshua returned and all Israel with him unto the camp where? We're fighting this battle, sun standing still. and we're going to be taking this battle against the 5 kings. And Makkedah is indeed where they're hiding in a cave. And they went all the way after Ajalon and the sun set. They went all the way back to Gilgal. And then they came again to take care of this problem. And then the 5 kings fled, verse 18. So Joshua returned and all Israel to the camp at Gilgal. Chapter 10, verse 43. If you have your Bibles, please turn there, please. And Joshua returned and all Israel with him unto the camp, where? Where? Gilgal. So he went to Gilgal, came here and dealt with the kings, and went back to Gilgal. Oh, we've got to realize that indeed he's going to be in a camp at another camp. We'll talk about that when we get there. But you have those two things. You begin to realize we've already seen that things were not in chronological order a lot of times. And here was, in the book of Jude, I was wanting to write to you about our common salvation, but I have to write to you about this, about the false teaching that's in that church. And I just love to hear God's grace and all that, but no, you got a book of Jude that says we need to defend the doctrine that God has given. They perverted that. And it looks like here that there was indeed the idea of returning all Israel with him to the camp of Gilgal. They will eventually get there. But the day the sun stood still, and it's standing still so they could finish their battle, I think we're still looking at them in Makkedah. And they just come from area of where the sun is standing still, and they're doing their battle there. And it was something that was inserted, maybe, but it was something so important that the writer who put it together realized, we need to put that one in there. Now, God didn't put the sun standing still in the New Testament. He can do that. But this was what's inserted. And I think probably, I'm just trying to put together these events because he's going to have another camp that he's there in Makkedah. That's where he's camping. That this is the events connected with the sun standing still that was important for the inspired historian who put together this, and Joshua would write a lot of that indeed he said, we're going to put it here. And so it's bookends, but it's something that's inserted between the two. I don't think here was the sun standing still, so I think let's go march. Hey, isn't that an interesting sun? We'll just march back to Gilgal. And then we march back and take care of the events that we see here. So the rest of chapter 10 is really dealing with the sun standing still. And that fits to me. What do you think? Because you have to deal, if you don't, then verse 15, when he hearkened unto the voice of a man, and Joshua's and all Israel with him, and they came to the camp of Gilgal. They went all the way back. And now this event is put here. Did he say, hey, we got 5 kings in hiding? Did he come back? I guess he could have. But I think these are things that are taking place, that here's the battle that we're looking at with these 5 kings. And they were important because they're part of the problem of Israel being able to occupy that land and drive out the enemy. And so these 5 kings fled. Why are they fleeing? Because we're going after the enemy, and the sun's standing still, and we got daylight on our side, and we're going after you. So they fled, and they went to get into the hiding in the cave. So what happens on that occasion? We'll find it says, and Joshua said, roll great stones unto the mouth of the cave, and set men by it to keep them. But stay not ye, pursue after your enemies, smite the hindest of them, and suffer them not to enter into their cities. Sound like the day of sun standing still. Fits, makes sense, it's logical. for Jehovah your God hath delivered them into your hand. Well, that's exactly what this whole miraculous event was taking place, was helping. And it came to pass when Joshua and the children of Israel had made an end of slaying them with a very great slaughter, till they were consumed, and the remnant which remained in them had entered into the fortified cities. Not everybody was put to death by the sword. They fled. They're in fortified cities. All the people returned to the camp to Joshua. Where is their camp? Gilgal. Where is it? Makeda. That's the day. Sun standing still. We're not camping back. We're not camping back in Gilgal, and we'll get there at the end of all the battles. We're at Makeda. That's where our camp is. You go pursue your enemies, and then we're going to come back and deal with the kings. They're hiding in the cave. And to me, this begins to make more sense all along. This has been inserted, actual teaching of God, inspired of God, but actually inserted in a place where they're still fighting that battle, but they eventually go back to Gilgal. And he said, well, at one time, this was not going to be included. And that's why we have verse 15. But there was a change of mind, that indeed this event is included. And he comes back and sums it up at the end of chapter 10. They went to Gilgal then. That's where they said, we're not overlooking that, but this is what happened in between time. That indeed makes sense. It tells us why the miracle happened, what God was doing for them, and it shows you how indeed they were going to bring courage to the people. So our next question: what did Joshua do to these 5 kings that gave courage to the people? So here they come back, they open the mouth of the cave, and they bring forth these 5 kings. He said, do that unto me out of the cave. And so he commands that to be open. And here come the kings. And he had the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, and I don't have that on any of these maps, but it's in the same area. They're found in other passages of Scripture. And this area that we're speaking about where Joshua is leading the people to conquer, there indeed Jarmuth is mentioned in other places in the Old Testament. But I couldn't find a map that said this is Jarmuth as we look at the others. It is recognized as a town, but as far as me putting a map up, I had a hard time doing that. And the commentators were not sure where it is, but they knew it was in the area. So there's Jarmuth, the king, and then the king of Lachish. We got that. We got the king of Eglon. And it came to pass when they brought forth these kings unto Joshua, Joshua called for all the men of Israel and said unto them, chiefs of men of war that went with him, come near. What did he have them do? I want you to come near and put your feet upon the what? Neck, and put their feet upon the necks of them. Here were kings in a humiliating place but reference to the people, that indeed here were these men of war put their feet upon the necks of the kings. Was that humiliating to them? But wouldn't that give courage to the fighting men of Israel? That they have that control at that moment over them. And Joshua said unto them, fear not, nor be dismayed. He used it as his point. Be strong and of good courage, for thus shall Jehovah do to all your enemies against whom you fight. And we got 5 leaders, Jerusalem, Jarmuth, Eglon, all those places, that indeed had their kings. And that was give them courage. Paul says, God didn't give you a spirit of fear. He had miraculous gifts, no doubt, but he didn't have a spirit of fear. And what happens sometimes, you can have fear and not exercise your gift. We think about miraculous, that's true. That's what Timothy was needed to understand. He needed to exercise his gift, but fear was keeping him from that. And we may have gifts, but we don't express them in ways that God would have us to express them. It's not, we're on an ego trip. It's the idea of using our gifts to help the cause and to help people be godly and all of those things. That's taking place there. You won't exercise that because fear is a very powerful force. I fear, therefore I don't do what I need to do. And Jeremiah, they said, oh, Jeremiah, go talk to God, and whatever he says we'll do. We'll stay here. We want to go to Egypt because we just assassinated the Babylonian king's governor over us, and we fear overcame their faith because they said, we'll do what you say. Anything you say, we will do. And when the circumstances came down for that to be handled, they buckled. And what's so sad is they drug Jeremiah with them. Why would they want to bring Jeremiah? Because they knew he was a prophet of God. They knew he would speak the truth to them. And they made him go down there. It's probably where he died. And that's fear overcomes our faith a lot of times. So these men had God on their side. Just here's a son standing still in the miraculous power. Joshua, you sure are a good leader. God's listening to you. He heard you this day, and it did exactly what you said it to do. But you can still have fear and not excel. Well, here's where you don't have to fear the king. Why? Because you got your foot on his neck. You got his foot on his neck. And that's what he'll do to all your enemies. He was constantly trying to cause people to be of good courage and not to fear. And we sometimes gloss over that. Stand like Joshua. I'm going to be strong and great. We sing that song. But a lot of times we don't carry it out. We don't do what. So well, that's a big step for me. You need to take those steps, and you'll find out that when you do that, you'll be able to accomplish some other things for the Lord, and overcome that barrier of fear that was keeping you from doing what either you're supposed to do in God's word, or what you would like to do that you think that would be growth in your personal life. So he was dealing with that problem of fear, and he gave courage, and he showed that in just a way of showing we have control over you. And then we found that the kings are put to death. So when that happens, fear not, in verse 2, and afterward Joshua smote them and put them to death and hanged them to 5 trees, and they were hanging up on the trees until evening. As we see others again, here's your king. He hanging up there. And people could see that. Here, who did that? Israel. And they used to have public hangings. I remember in Arkansas, gallows were very long, where they executed a lot of people. But when you came out to see that, you brought your children. You want to see that. Because this is what criminals, that's what happens to them. I took my boy to Brady, Texas, and went into the old courthouse. And that courthouse upstairs had a place where they hanged their prisoners, and they had the floor there. And I was telling my son, that's what's going to happen to you if you don't straighten out. He's just a little boy, but it got his attention. I don't think he's robbing banks these days, but that's what they had for that. It's an object lesson. This is what happens. We've taken that away. That'd be cruelty to a lot of people. I mean, people don't even take people to funerals. They don't want to see a dead body. That's life. That's part of life and death, and it's not hard. And you got to be careful. Age, I understand that, but we need to realize we're all going this route, and they were to see that. So they saw that. Came to pass that going down the sun. Why would the sun go down? Because this job's completed. Now the sun's going down. Everything's kind of in order. The earth is rotating, and it's setting in the west. It goes down, and this is not a remarkable thing. All of a sudden, this is happening. Because indeed, the events had accomplished. And they took them down off the trees and cast them in the cave wherein they had hid themselves, and laid great stones on the mouth of the cave unto this very day. And so we see that event taking place. But now there's this conquest that keeps on happening before they go back to Gilgal that I think is also included here as well. So question number 15, what did Hebron and Debar have in common? I don't know if you picked up on this, but I want us to see it. Notice when we come in chapter 10, and we'll just look at, I want to see where I want to stop there. I'm going to start back up to verse 34. Joshua passed Lachish and all Israel with him unto Eglon, and they encamped against it and fought against it, and they took it on that day and smote it with the edge of the sword. And all the souls that were therein he utterly destroyed that day according to all he had done to Lachish. Joshua went up from Eglon and Israel with him, and he went unto Hebron. So in verse 36, he went unto Hebron. That's one of our places. And they fought against it, and they took it and smote it with the edge of the sword, the king thereof, and all the cities thereof, and all the souls that were therein. He left none remaining, according to all that he had done, and all the souls were therein. That sounds kind of like what he did in verse 34, and verse 36. Then Joshua returned to Israel, and he came to Debar. And he fought against it, and he took all the kings thereof and all the cities thereof, and they smote them with the edge of the sword, utterly destroyed all of them, as he had done to Hebron. So he did it to Debar, and the king thereof, as he had done in Libnah, and to the king thereof. So Fite, what in the world are you saying? What do they have in common? And they're like everybody else. No, they're not. And it tells you how great these cities were. What is common with Hebron and Debar that, while at the same time, they utterly destroyed everybody? What is in common between those two cities? Did you find that? They had multiple cities. They had control of multiple cities that depended upon their protection. And they took care of Big Daddy, and they took care of all the fortified cities as well. That's what those two places were. That was what was important about them. That distinguished them. That's what they had in common. But we just read over fortified cities. They're cities. They protected them, but they couldn't protect them this day because God's people had God upon their side. Question 16, what king and people proved to be of no help to Lachish withstanding Israel? Look at verse 33. Then Horam, king of Gezer, came up to help Lachish, and Joshua smote him and his people until he had left him none remaining. So we get to see that take. So he couldn't help him. So here a king comes to help another city. All scrambling done. The 5 kings killed, put up for all to see for the rest of the day. All those things are taking place, and God's people are wiping them out, as we see here in this campaign that we're talking about. Briefly describe the condition of the cities after Israel defeated them. We've looked at some of these things. So what stands out of these cities? That here, those who had fortified cities or had cities depending upon them, they were destroyed as well. But if you were to sum up the condition of the cities after Israel defeated them, they have people left? I mean, you're dealing with men, women. You're destroying them. And he said, well, that sounds like genocide. God did it. I don't like God. Thank you. But God is taking care of an idolatrous people. There are consequences of families having children, and the children learning their old ways, and he's just completely teaching them to take them all out. You don't marry people, but they were to be destroyed. Some were escaping. We've already seen it here. Some were escaping to fortified cities. But indeed, the condition was horrible They could not withstand the force of Israel's because of God's power against them. And they were wiped out. Anything that breathes, as we see in some of the places, that's taking place. Give the western boundary and eastern boundary of Joshua's southern intervention of Canaan. Because in the latter part of this chapter, he kind of says that Joshua smote the land. And I know it's hard to find some of these places on a map, but I want us to, we know, where is Gaza now? And do you know where, we've been up to date, is there a town of Gaza in the Palestinian area? Or Gaza? Yeah, it's right on the Mediterranean Sea. That's kind of west, isn't it? You don't get more west than that unless you get in the water. But there's that boundary. They fought there. And then if you go south, it's still in the middle, but really to the west. Southwest of that, you have this western boundary that he's speaking about. Verse 41, Joshua smote them from Kadesh Barnea even unto Gaza, and all the country of Goshen even unto Gibeon. So that would be the northern part. They're going to do a northern campaign, but there indeed is, we know where Gibeon is as we go north, but a little bit north of that you have Goshen. Land of Goshen, that sounds like Egypt. So, wow, boundaries really going, that's heading west. But this Goshen, people try to figure out where that is. You know, they think they have another city that could identify with that, but that is on the eastern part of what Joshua has taken in this southern campaign. It's not all the way north, it's going, but there's your east-west boundaries. That's what we can learn from that. And all these kings and their land, and Joshua take it one time because Jehovah, the God of Israel, fought for Israel. And that's what we're seeing, question number 19. Who did Israel have fighting for them? Joshua? Or was it God? The Bible says it's God. Joshua and the God of Israel fought for Israel, and Joshua returned, and all Israel with him, into the camp at Magadah, or the camp at Gilgal. We're back home. Battle's over. Kings conquered. Southern campaign done. Now we're ready for the northern campaign, chapter lesson number 5. Any comments before we close? Okay, thank you for being here and participating.